As you may or may not be aware, the world's population is growing exponentially, nearing the 8 billion mark. 8 billion is a lot for our tiny planet, and with it comes concerns not just about climate change but our global food security. So what is the problem? Easy, you may say, let's grow some more crops, we can rear more animals. But as with everything else, nothing is ever that straightforward. So let's put it in perspective. Bees are crucial to our economy. Without them, it would cost the UK £1.8 billion a year to pollinate crops, having a knock-on effect of increasing food costs and also damaging our economy. Over the past 30 to 40 years, our wild pollinators have taken a hit from habitat destruction and fragmentation, alien species, the use of pesticides, just to name a few. This has resulted in this valuable ecosystem service becoming increasingly under pressure. So, what is the answer? We have managed pollinators, the honeybee, since Egyptian times. We have contained them and we've transported bees around the world to aid pollination service. So is it as simple as transporting bees to areas where wild bee numbers are dwindling and a case of it's just business, or do we need to look and examine the potential ecological damage that pollinators en masse may cause? Since the 1900s, the UK has lost 13 species of bee, 35 are considered under threat, and across Europe 1 in 10 species faces extinction. Are managed pollinators the answer to our pollination crisis, with hives being brought in to pollinate our crops and polytunnels? It may seem like a simple solution, but let's look at the potential problems. The first thing to take into consideration is competition between the managed bees and the wild bees. As mentioned previously, habitat loss and fragmentation is one of the biggest threats to wild pollinators, so potentially increasing bee numbers and therefore competition could have a detrimental effect. There have been many studies examining the impact of non-native managed pollinators, including the Bombus terrestris in South America and Japan, but little in the UK. One area of concern is potential competitive displacement of wild pollinators and a resource overlap. Resource overlap is where managed and wild bees use the same resource. Previous studies have been conducted in Europe, and these have examined the impact of this resource overlap between the managed and the wild bees with mixed results. One study found there was no evidence at all of any impact on wild bee population, whereas another showed that wild bees were adversely affected, reducing their body mass. Other studies have shown that managed bees have a higher nectar foraging rate than native wild bees, this being linked to the physical size of the bee, with larger bees being able to utilise nectar resources more effectively. One thing that is evident though from the research is that wild bees are adversely impacted close to the apiaries, and as we move further away into semi-natural habitats, the impact reduces. Another area of concern is the use of managed pollinators for mass flowering crops, for example the oilseed rape. We've all seen large fields of rape flowers providing a valuable and reliable nectar source. A study in France concluded that during the flowering season, oilseed rape flowers are utilised by honeybees, with wild bees foraging in semi-natural habitats. The concern arises when this reliable nectar source finishes. What happens then? Crossover into semi-natural habitats, increasing competition with wild bees, but again there is limited research into what happens when flowering ceases. It's estimated that approximately 40,000 to 60,000 pollination units are imported into the UK annually. This increasing use of commercial pollinator services has brought about a heightened biosecurity concern in relation to the spread of pathogens and parasites to wild pollinators, with human-mediated pathogen invasions being the greatest threat to wild pollinators. Even though EU and UK legislation controls the movement of managed pollinators, our understanding about the impact of stress, pathogen, parasite spillback is limited. Even though threats to wild pollinators from diseases are a natural occurrence, the increase in bee domestication, the density and management of bees has led to the possible intensification of this, along with additional pressures from pesticide use and lack of nutritional resources. All the evidence points to a lack of understanding about the impact managed pollinators have on our wild bee populations and habitats. One thing is for sure is that managed pollinators provide a valuable ecosystem service, yet we need to exercise caution when managing for pollination services. We must fully understand that introducing pollinators for ecosystem services is not managing for pollinators, and that species diversity is critical for ecosystem stability, especially when the impact of climate change is so uncertain.